Once we are converted, there are 7 additional glorious truths that come into play as essential components of our identity. These will constitute our focus for the remainder of this book. As we seek to answer that more elaborate question, it is beyond dispute that we must start with the fact that we are in Christ Jesus. What does it mean to be in Christ? Is it a question of location, like being in a house? Is it something like belonging to a club or an organization? No, the term in Christ is the Apostle Paul's shorthand expression for being united to Christ. It is one of Paul's favorite expressions, and, including similar expressions such as in him or in the Lord, Paul uses it more than 160 times in his letters. Clearly, this is an important concept in Paul's theology, and it should be an important concept for us, because all the remaining answers to the question, who am I, are based upon the fact that we are in Christ, or we are united to Christ. This, of course, begs the question, what does it mean to be united to Christ? To answer it, we begin with 1 Corinthians 15:22. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive. Note the 2 expressions, in Adam and in Christ. And again in 1 Corinthians 15:45, Paul refers to the first man Adam and to the last Adam, who is clearly Christ. What Paul is getting at in these 2 verses is that in God's way of dealing with humanity, there are only 2 men, Adam and Christ. All the rest of us are represented before God by one or the other of these 2 men. Adam as our representative. In verse 22, Paul said, in Adam all die. This idea is developed more completely in Romans 5:12-19. Verse 12 says, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. This verse is a reference to Adam's sin of eating the forbidden fruit as recounted in Genesis 3. God had said, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. Adam, along with Eve, ate, and they both died. They instantly died spiritually, and they would eventually die physically. But Adam was not an ordinary man, so that the consequences of his sin would fall only on him. Rather, Adam had been appointed by God to represent the entire human race. As a result, the consequences of his sin fell upon all humanity. When Paul writes in verse 12, and so death spread to all men because all sinned, he is referring not to our own individual sins, but to the fact that we were so united to Adam as our representative head, that when he sinned, we all sinned, and so we all suffered the consequences of Adam's sin. This idea of the representative nature of Adam's sin is further developed in verse 18. Therefore, as one trespass led to condemnation for all men, and again in verse 19, for as by the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners. Note, especially in verse 19, the expression, many were made sinners. All humanity, with the exception of Christ, who was not descended from Adam, suffered the consequences of Adam's sin. We were made sinners. As each of us comes into the world, we come as sinners by nature. In answer to the question, who am I? We would therefore have to say, I am a sinner. That is why David acknowledged, surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Psalm 51:5. David said the nature he received at conception was a sinful nature. Why was this true? It was because David, like you and me, was represented by Adam in the garden, and through the disobedience of Adam, David was made a sinner. Picture 2 men, Adam and Christ, standing before God. Behind Adam stands all of humanity representatively united to him. We all come into this world in Adam. Because of that, Paul's